But I think what happens to our community, I think you're doing it in this room, we've just got to do more. But looking at the 5 basic needs that we have, food, clothing, shelter, belonging, and security. Food, clothing, shelter. And in some of our homes, of course, if they don't belong there, or actually if they don't own the home, sometimes that's a problem. But here's what I'm believing what we must do. We've got to engage. When I think about what we did, when we about planting the trees, for those that have gone on transition, that work in the community, that's engaging the community. We've got to engage them and that they may actually believe they're a part. We've got to get back to the we the people idea and design. We've got to get back and let people understand that you make the difference. You might think that you're an individual. However, when we come together, we actually own the city. We own the city. But when you don't feel like you belong and you're not safe, and I don't own anything, I'm just drifting through life. We're not drifting, and I think you believe it. One of the things that I have and I teach and I share, you can't teach what you don't know. So if you don't know, you got to get knowed up. And I believe that you in this room, everybody in this room, you want to get knowed up. You want to know what you can do to make a difference in the community. And actually you're doing it. We just can't quit. We've got to keep on. And you got to engage those that are in the community. You got to knock on the doors of those whose grass is growing high. Grass is growing high. Man, go in there, go over there, knock on the door. Maybe you get the kids engaged with that person, with that neighbor. I am my brother's keeper. Cut the grass. We used to do that. You know, you used to borrow sugar from your next door neighbor. You used to send your baby next door and get flowers. Let's go back to that kind of idea. Engage that person who's living next door. Then after you engage them, you can empower them. Let them know that we own this. I mean, you've got to vote. You've got to be involved with the tax money, because we all pay taxes. Every time we spend something, we pay taxes. We're fueling this particular economy. So you've got to most certainly engage them, empower them, and then we've got to educate those in the community. And I think that's what we're here doing. We've got to educate them. And let's not get into but we're looking at what's going on with our school system. We've got to begin to engage our kids, because it's something that we need to push, and that's civic education. Our kids need to understand that they're a part, that we the people. You got to know that we've got to be responsible for what's going on in the community, and that'll stop you from throwing the trash out. Okay, and it happens in our schools. But man, I can just take you through it. I don't want to hear my preachings. But even in our schools, you think it's bad all the time. Going down the neighborhood with trash. Why don't you walk the corridors of some of the schools when they bring the potato chips early in the morning? You spend time you didn't eat candy and all this stuff early in the morning. However, somebody forgot to tell the kids. And they throw the paper down. And they believe the janitor's responsible for picking it up. Our kids need to they need to understand that it's your responsibility. We're in this neighborhood together. So when we're engaging, we've got to get the kids together and begin to clean up the neighborhood. Get the babies, start them at 6. Let them be successful by 6. Let them start picking up paper in the neighborhood. You got anything?
The youth piece. I want to come back to this Brenda in a second.
Sure. Yeah. So one of the things that Pastor Jones said, I think is really important too, is that idea of basic needs. And when people don't feel that they belong, when they don't feel part of a community, the very natural reaction is to become incredibly self-focused. Because that's, no one else is looking out for me, so I got to look out for myself, right? And I become very self-protective. And so when people feel they may live in a neighborhood but not be part of a community, right? In those situations, the completely rational behavior is to be self-protective and self-focused. That seems like a logical reaction if you don't feel like you have people around you who care about you and are there to support you and to help you with the upkeep of the home, or when the grass is tall, come and see what's going on. And it's all neurological. When you feel unsafe, cortisol is released. It triggers fight and flight reactions. So we become aggressive, or we hide, or whatever those things are. So I think this idea of being really intentional about building relationships within our communities and bringing people into that, so that need is being met, that need of belonging is being met, makes people feel safer. And when they feel safer and they feel included in those situations, then they're neurologically capable of being focused on other people. But when that isn't happening, it's very, very, very difficult. And then the last thing that I would just add to that is, I think there's this tendency, there's a natural tendency for people when we observe someone else's behavior to, the tendency is to make assumptions about the kind of person they are based upon what we've observed from their behavior. Mm-hmm. So the neighbor who's not cutting their grass just doesn't care about our neighborhood, doesn't care about our community, right? That's the natural reaction. I mean, I actually had this experience a few weeks ago where I was driving down the interstate and somebody cut me off in traffic. And let's just say within the confines of my car, there was a lot of colorful language used to describe the quality of character of that individual, right? Let's just put it that way, right? And then like 2 days later, I was on the same freeway and I was about to be late to a meeting and I eased in front of somebody, let's just put it that way, and I look at my rear mirror and I see the same kind of enthusiasm, right? And there might have been a few hand gestures and things. And the first thought that went through my head was, what is their problem? Calm down. What's the big deal, right? So when I did it, I had a reason. I was about ready to be late to a meeting, and I didn't really cut them off. I just eased my car in front of them. But when they did it, my immediate reaction was, what a jerk, what a completely inconsiderate human being. It was a little more colorful than that, but you get the idea, right? And so our natural tendency when we're explaining somebody else's behavior, particularly behavior we don't like, is that's because that's the kind of person they are. Right? And I think this notion of when the grass is growing tall, challenge ourselves to think of alternative narratives. What are the possibilities other than they don't care about their yard or they don't care about our neighborhood? Maybe their lawnmower broke. Maybe they have an injury and they're not able to get out in the yard and cut their grass. There's lots of different reasons. And then I think even better than creating alternative narratives is to go knock on the door and see what's going on and engage with those people. So just a couple of thoughts.
Yeah, no, but how forgetful and how forgiving we are of each other. I often say that my greatest superpower is perspective. And so I try to use that, and that's the point of not creating a narrative, but actually finding the narrative that actually makes no sense. One of the things I was going to share about the youth piece, because I do think a lot of the work that you all are doing in this room, we might not see in this particular generation. I think you all understand and know that you're planting seeds for other generations. One of the things I asked as an example for MPHA during Epigenetics was, how do we create grace within the process of what we're looking at with youth violence? So as an example, if vandalization is happening, how do we go get a parent and a young person and say, let's create an alternative punishment or punitive action that looks a little different than let's just call the police or let's put you out of your lease. Let's figure out how they do a cleaning activity together. Let's see what that looks like. I got pushback, but I'm going to keep asking those type of questions. When do we keep asking those type of questions? As I asked the question, or as I presented the piece about churches, one of the pieces about that is, why don't we have more young people who are cutting grass? If someone knocked on my door and said, I'll cut your grass for $10 a day, please, happily, because it's a lot of grass. But what does that look like for a neighborhood association to say, for the summer, we'll give you a stipend of $1,500 for you to take care of this particular block? What does that look like? Mm-hmm. We've got to start tapping more into the entrepreneurial thinking. So at the core of who I am as an entrepreneur, it means I can, to the point of hammers and nails, I fix problems professionally all day, every day. I probably can fix your whole life in about 5 minutes. Because that's how my brain is wired to think. Many of us have the potential to find and tap into some of those ways to think too. You can think about how you can stop having litter. It's about modeling behavior. So what that means is, I keep throwing the litter, but every day it's picked up. Eventually I'm going to be shamed into, well, why is there no, like, someone cares about what's happening, so now I've got to care. But back to the point of my colleague here, one of the pieces that we learn, particularly when individuals live in housing communities or are renting, that we think that they don't care about things that are happening, but we can't care about the dog, like the poop, when I can't cross 12 within the confines of, I can't cross it at all within the confines of the light, but I certainly can't do a crosswalk crossing. And I literally have a senior tower and then a housing community with tons of children. So how do I care about dog poop? That's difficult to do. So I'm saying that's where modeling comes in. That's where, when you leverage your privilege some of you in this space have that privilege. Everybody does, actually. You just find out what it is. If you leverage that privilege and you come and you say, well, they care about their kids and I care about poop, so I'm going to clean the poop so the kids don't have to walk away. Okay, now we can leverage what we're doing. Now someone else can care about their kids. That's what we've got to do with each other about being better humans. I am sometimes going to take a bigger brunt of my community stuff because someone has to get to care about their children or care about their elderly parent. Somebody got to just die to do that. And that's their role in this world right now. And then next month, they may have to switch with me. That's what we have to do to be better neighbors with each other. Not necessarily get you to act right. When I saw the behave, act right, I thought there's a right and a wrong, but maybe this doesn't have to be that narrative. There's just, you can do it differently now and someone else can do it differently next time. That's probably how I would look at right versus wrong in this situation.
Can we ask a question?
Yes.
I'm impressed with all three of the panelists and their perspective on neighborhoods and what's happening. So one way that I think we as leaders can help create that, build that relationship is create opportunities for them to get involved. And one example of a story, one example is Metro Codes contacted us. They contacted me about a neighbor in our neighborhood. Because I'm always checking with them to see, hey, is anybody facing environmental court? Is there anything we can do? So this particular resident was in environmental court not once, but twice.
Does everybody know about what environmental court is?
Your house is the best.
Okay, now environmental, it's within the codes department. Environmental court is after you get a warrant or notice about a particular violation, it goes through a process. Mm-hmm. And the short story, it'll eventually end up in environmental court where you, the homeowner, are assessed fines per day for a particular violation if it's not corrected. So this particular homeowner was in environmental court. And when they called me, I said, oh my God, that's in my neighborhood, what can we do to help? So I went by her home, and the front of the house was okay. It was the back that the neighbors were seeing. I mean, things were stockpiled as to where she couldn't even get out her back door because things had piled so high, and the grass was up. It was just, I was like, oh my God. So come to find out, once I went by there to visit with her to see what the neighbors were seeing, when I talked with her, when I knocked on the door, first she just kind of cracked the door open, and I told her who I was and that I wanted to know if we could help her. And so she came out, and when she came out, we were going around the back, she stopped. And I said, what's wrong? She said, I haven't been back here in years. Wow. Since my husband passed away. Because that's where we were spending our time. So they had, she stopped right there, and I didn't rush her, I didn't push her. I was just letting her, that's as far as she has been in years. And so it's like, I let her go through the moment, and when she finally got there, she just stood there and cried. And so she did not see what everybody else was seeing that were calling. So anyway, I asked her if we could help her. So what we did, that was an opportunity for the neighbors to get involved. So we had trucks, we had bags, we rented a storage shed for her down the street. So the guys came out, they loaded everything on the truck. Now some of this stuff, boxes had been sogged from rain and had all kind of things. But to me, it was like, we could just throw this away. But there was sentimental value to that. And it's like, to me, it was like, let's just bag it up so it could look good. It's like, no, she wanted to keep it. And so we let her put it in bags, put it in boxes, and took it to the storage, let her pick out the storage, let her keep what she wanted. It was a whole Saturday, the neighbors helped. And I can show you a before and after picture. I think it was later in the paper, I'm thinking. Anyway, it was like, once we got in there and the neighbors got in, all of this, she just didn't care. They didn't, all of that went away. So my point was to create an opportunity for the neighbors to get involved, which will help build that relationship. And then they can see that, somebody do care. Not one time did we say, hey, you gotta come to the neighborhood meeting. Not one time did we say that, but saying each one of you, what each one of you said was captured in that one opportunity that we had, because we supplied we filled some of the basic needs that she had. But it was kind of like hoarding, but it was a social issue, internal issue. So you touched on that as well. But anyway, let's not be quick to assume they don't care, So anyway, that was a story I wanted to share.
Because we can all be there, right? Because we can all be there. There's one thing about life: death and taxes all happen, right? We're gonna all get affected by death at some point. How we grieve it is gonna be different for all of us.
Yeah, so let's create opportunities to make let our neighbors get involved so we can show them how to behave.
Yes.
That's, I'm glad you talked about sort of the organizational stuff that you all are talking about and the personal stuff that we're dealing with on the streets. But one of the things I've been fortunate enough to work and learn from working in NOAA and affordable housing is to really look at what we're talking about is in many ways a way that we would like to live. And we probably did back in the day. So many of us talk about what it was like growing up in the 50s and whatever in those kind of family units. If you look at the design of anything that's happening in this city, you are looking at either stacks of houses that people just come and go, and their social life is either online or it's in coffee shops and bars and things. Or you're looking at planned communities where developers are coming in and saying, we're going to make this little round space, put all the houses and a lot of green space in between. The cost of those houses, you are not going to see communities of color develop in those kind of places, because the only people that can afford them are people that are going to look, people who buy them are going to look for people that look like them. And with a shortage of affordable housing and wages and all the other stuff that makes life crazy, the communities they're creating are not conducive to making neighborhoods. We know that from HOAs. They talk about how difficult it is. We know in our old neighborhoods, for many of us sitting around here, this is the way we grew up. It's an ideal. How do we get back to that? I don't know, because we're not building that. We're not building it aesthetically. We're not building it as a community. There's the struggle for working class and working poor people to live in the communities that they work in is impossible. So there's so much that, in terms of your church, I think you said they were underutilized, maybe in some areas, but in the east side of Nashville, we got every church that's rocking. There's programs, there's schools, there's charitable groups, there's missions that they do that are very much like yours, work in the neighborhood, make sure that your neighbors are good. They don't even have to come to your church, So all that stuff's happening, but design-wise, and we're being able to work in planning and understanding that the development of communities now is a whole different vision than what we grew up in. And do I want it back? I don't know. I don't know if I want my mother people knowing 3 things before I get home with my mother. I didn't like it then. I can't imagine the kids that are growing up now even putting up with that kind of nonsense from their parents. That ain't gonna happen. So the ideal of what we want in terms of a neighbor and a community has to be put in context of the reality that we have of how we make neighbors and make neighborhoods by design and by intent. So,
I have a question I'd like to ask the panelists, maybe if they would respond to. I come from a 50s suburban neighborhood out in Donaldson, not really urban, still fairly suburban, but I have 2 different elements in my neighborhood. I have homeowners and I have renters. And I find that engagement with those 2 different groups is very different. And so the homeowners, I think, have a stake, they own property, they've been there for years, or they plan to be there for years, and they are more easy for me to engage. It's tougher with the tenants who come in, they might be there for a year on a lease, and then they're going to be gone, and we see some tension in the neighborhood about those kinds of things. How can we work with the people who are shorter term residents?
I would say we find common ground. Oftentimes, I think what's underutilized in our community is engaging the schools. We don't have children in school anymore, but they're going to affect your neighborhood. One way or the other, our kids, you have schools in every neighborhood that's here. And we're missing them, we're not using them. They should be utilized as your little soldiers. Crime in the community is going to affect you whether you're renting in that community or whether you're buying. And everybody wants to be safe. So stopping and having that kind of conversation and finding common ground with them, that's absolutely necessary. And with the cultural kind of differences, we've got to bridge that gap. And with the divisive pieces that are taking place in the state and country at this point, it would be amazing if we just start dialoguing, whether we're black, white, young, old, and say, hey, hello, and smile. And begin to start by just having that conversation, looking people in the face, that I'm not afraid of you, we're in this community together. Let's actually stop and say, hey, and use that good Southern hospitality to do that. And churches, of course, if you belong to church or mosque or whatever, we've got to engage. That's why, the Fairfield Church, something going on at the Fairfield Church every day, and we have strange level, a diverse group of people, whether Jews, Muslims, some black, white, there, and Kingdom Cafe on Jefferson Street, where we're trying to engage the community. So we've got to do it, and don't allow anybody to tell you it can't be done. Make it happen. Do it.
I think we have to redefine engagement. And Ms. Ruby, you were pointing to it, talking about the meeting piece. Often we think they don't come to a neighborhood association meeting, we don't see them at maybe a community fair or what have you. And sometimes engagement is just hello. Just even to speak is sometimes okay. I tend to think that we experience, I think, one of two things. Either our interpretation of them, so we've had a negative experience with them, we saw them roll their neck, and so that's how they always answer every question, or that's how they always speak, or based on how we would respond to a situation like that. So if we said hi and they said hi back, but somehow you didn't hear them, then we think, well, they didn't speak to me. They might have, you just didn't hear them, like give them that benefit of that doubt. So, but the other part about engagement, I think, to Reverend Jones's point, is what's the common ground for them? And to the point of what others of you have said in the room, how can we meet them where they want to be? So they are a renter, maybe they want to be a homeowner. And what does that conversation look like? At some point, it might be that you can provide them some resources for how to purchase a home at some point. Or maybe there's a program there, you saw that they had a young person in the yard. There's also other indications of young people, basketball courts, bicycles in the yard. You all know those things, you know signs. And so knowing that there's a park, like for instance, I didn't know for a while we were living on McGavick that there's actually a park behind McGavick Elementary. You wouldn't really know it because there's not really big markers unless you're walking or unless you go to the park's website, right? Because it's on school grounds, which seemed a little unsafe to me. But nonetheless, knowing that that's there. So if you know there's a young person, you know they just moved in, being able to say, oh, well, did you know that that's actually open for you as a community member? So it's about that level of engagement versus we need them to come out and contribute in some big way that maybe they're already contributing as much as they can. So I think that's just reframing how we engage. Engagement is just a touch point. Really, investment is what we're looking for, and so we can build more resilient communities. When we can get to investment, then that's a different level of relationship, but engagement is just a touch point. And so we got to reframe that, our responsibility people have based on engagement. Like they have engaged, they said hi back, or what have you.
I guess a couple of things. One, I'd go back to the idea of making assumptions about why people behave the way that they do. I think if there's a fault line that's sort of perceivable between homeowners and renters, I've been a renter and I lived in downtown Atlanta as a renter, and I remember sort of feeling like I don't really belong to this community association, right? All these people own their homes and we're just renting, and so maybe we're not really part of that, you know. And then there were people who reached out and who were completely inclusive of us, and you know. So I think that it may be that some of these folks you've tried to reach out to and they're not as receptive to it, but I think just being careful not to make those assumptions that they're not as invested or they don't care as much because they're just renting would be part of it. I think Pastor Jones said something earlier about this idea of sort of mission, vision, purpose, and I always think about that, and then I think you followed it up with empowerment, and I think that's such a powerful combination of helping people see, here's our vision for this community, and you're part of that community, whether you're renting here for a year or whether you're planning on owning a home here for 30 years, you're a part of that community, and here's our vision for community. Here's what that means, and here's what we're inviting you to be a part of, and then empowering people to have agency and to have impact on that. I think is a really important and powerful point. And there's like the old, I don't even know if it really happened or if it now it's just sort of a, you know, sort of a myth, but there's that story of when John F. Kennedy went to go visit a NASA facility, and he was getting a tour, and there was a custodian there, and he walked up to the custodian and said, "Hi, I'm John Kennedy, what are you doing?" And the custodian responded, "I'm helping put a man on the moon." And, you know, whenever I hear that story, I just think like great leadership at NASA, you know, great culture at NASA. Like they created an environment where the person who's emptying wastebaskets, cleaning toilets, felt as though he was contributing to this bigger mission, that what he did mattered and made a difference. And there was somehow that connection was made, you know, between those two pieces. And so, and I'm rambling a bit, but I think the idea there would be creating this vision, articulating the vision for the community, inviting those people to be a part of it, whether they're going to be there for 9 months or whether they're going to be there for 30 years. And then, you know, trying to sort of help them recognize how what they choose to do makes such a profound difference in our neighborhood, and inviting them to be an agent of that and a part of that. And I think people gravitate towards that sort of meaning, you know, that what they do matters, and it really makes a difference. I don't know if that's helpful.
No, I was just going to say, one of the things, so I have one question. Is it a homeowners association or a neighborhood association?
It's different things.
Not an HOA, it's
Okay.
a nonprofit.
And I asked because you know that makes a big difference, but the question or the suggestion I was going to make is, sometimes I find that we want people to engage at meetings and be on committees at meetings, but like if someone knocked on my door and said, "Hey," like don't sign me up for this, Jim, but like if you said, "I want you to do the marketplace," you know, can you do the marketplace? I don't have to come to any meetings, and I can just email it to you, or I would do it easier than coming to a meeting and giving a report out. And so sometimes I believe we do meetings to meet, and I will tell you we're in meeting fatigue. You all talking about charrettes. We've been doing charrettes for a long time. And so I would just be cautious that if you need someone to do something, they maybe can do it with just very clear instruction. Like, "Hey, can you lead this committee and do this thing? Email me by next Tuesday." A person is more likely to be like, "Oh, yeah, that won't take that much of my time," versus I've got to come to a meeting, then I've got to talk about the meeting to debrief it, and then I've got to do the thing. So that's another just suggestion generally for those of you who need to meet.
I think really what we have to rethink what participation looks like at our neighborhood associations. What are the barriers people are carrying around in their heads that keep them from making that first step to connecting with folks?
Oh, you're asking us?
Because I think we're challenged. There's something that's challenging us in ourselves that we're not getting out there and saying, "Hey, you know, come be part."
It's just basic self-worth. And even with our kids in school, if they don't feel like I'm really smart enough, parents sometimes don't engage in school because they have a bad experience with a principal or teacher. So they come in cussing. And you really don't care. You speak to me anyway. You know, I look like you. That's the issue. I don't own this house, you know, and the landlord's not keeping it up. They want me to pay this $1,300-$1,500 a month rent. I can't keep my lights on. And you're looking at me like I'm nothing. So, I mean, it's a self-worth piece. And again, what goes a long way is looking somebody in the eye and being able to say, "Hey, how you doing?" And smile and wait for a response. And then respond with that back. The human effort. Let's go back to the human effort. and the basic needs. We've got to get back to that basic kind of idea.
Yeah, I know I sound like an academic because I am one, so sorry. But there's a concept in this idea of reciprocity, right? That when we give to people, there's this felt sense of obligation for them to give something in return. In low quality relationships, it's very transactional, right? Like we keep track of who's ahead in this relationship, and have I given more than I've gotten back, right? Because there's a lack of trust, and I'm worried I'm going to be taken advantage of, and so it's very, tit for tat. It's very just sort of, I can't let this get out of balance too much. In high quality relationships, in relationships with people in your family, with your friends, you don't worry about those things, right? I moved 8 times in 9 years, and my best friend would travel to wherever I was to help me load the truck and unload the truck and do all those things, right? And he wasn't sitting around going, well, when are you going to pay this back? That never crossed his mind because he cared about me, he loved me, he's my friend, he's there to help me. And so I think the other part of it that I would suggest is we take kind of a servant leadership approach. If we don't make the first knock on the door to ask them to cut their ass or do this or to do that, but to the human relationship part, to say, we're here, we're this community and we want you to be a part of it, and we're here to see what you need. And we're here to help you and serve you and build that relationship of trust. Then when you do go knock on the door another time and say, hey, we have something we need some help with, can you help us? The likelihood that will go up, or that they will say yes goes way up, because it's not a, well, what have you done for me? That's not the status of that relationship. So I think just building relationships, seeking to fulfill other people's needs as much as we can, over the long term or the medium term will create more of an opportunity, I think.
Yeah, so I go back to the leading with grace. In my office, our company values are grace, resilience, integrity, tenacity. We always though want to lead with grace for ourselves and for others. What that means in the context for me is that there are lots of barriers for a person, race, gender orientation, misunderstandings. Television tells us one thing, social tells us another thing. We hear all these things. There's also a piece that I talk about sometimes because although I'm not an academic, I often sometimes go there, which is epigenetics, which is the journeying or traveling of DNA from generation to generation, right? And so you have to keep in mind that some of the things that people are dealing with, the trauma that travels through them is greater than you'll ever know. And so that's why I would say lead with grace, because it will hopefully realign you to say, it's not me. The 4 agreements say, don't take anything personal. It's about them. They're having their own experience with this world that's very different than mine. And so I'm going to keep coming back and having a conversation with them. I'm going to keep coming back and saying hi. I'm going to keep offering my good self to them, regardless of, to the point of like transaction, regardless of if I counted and they've done anything good for me. When we lead there, or when we create another narrative, and really we're not supposed to create any narratives, that's another part of it. It's like it just is what it is. A person is allowed to have a bad day or a bad moment. Series of moments you might not be able to get over, I get that. But just keep in mind that a person is managing their own trauma. We are walking around, every single person is walking around with tons of trauma, but in particular, people of color, and even more in particular, Black people, are walking around with tons of trauma. And so it's trying to decipher all of that, hundreds of years of trauma, walking up to you saying, hi, I have a free service. Because I can give you an example of this particular community. Several years ago, someone said, I was trying to give away free mammograms and free dental and free, and I said, let me just tell you something about free. The last time Black people got free stuff, slavery. I mean, there are moments where people don't understand where you're coming from. So I want to just keep that in mind. So as you're thinking, I'm giving all of me, be mindful that some of all of you is challenging for a person. Doesn't mean they don't need it, doesn't mean they don't receive it, it just means they need to process it a little bit differently. And the same goes for any person who's had any adversity in their background. You're just walking around with trauma. And so we're trying to just be loving with each other. So that's why I say just continue to lead and extend grace as much as you can for yourself and for others. So when you got out in front of that person, you were giving grace to yourself, but it's also about extending grace to the person who does it to you too. Right? It's about
didn't
saying,
do so good on that.
No, absolutely. It's a work in progress. Listen, this is not like me saying it doesn't mean that it happens every time. It just means that it's something we have to be mindful of. That every single person is walking around with. We listen to hundreds of thousands of images and voices and noise every single day, and you're trying to disseminate that and then make good of a face you just saw on TV, Law and Order, that looked negative, and now you got to see the same type of face, and that looks positive to you, and you're trying to decipher which one is it. That happens all the time. So just lead with grace. Continue that part.
See a couple of hands, Pearl, go ahead.
Thank you so much for what y'all are doing. I don't know how to answer this exactly, but one of the things I've been working in this neighborhood for 30 years, one of the things I notice is that although I appreciate that we'll all walk around with all of that, what I find is that there's a lot more talent, a lot more giftedness than any of us anticipate. And yet what we find in neighborhood associations often is that I finally have a place, I built this, and I'm not letting go of it. So we find leaders that stay forever. And so people start dropping out because there's nowhere for them to grow. How do we as neighborhood associations make those places where people can actually grow? And I began to view my role as working myself out of a job.
Just, and the church, we share the church gives make room that together we're more powerful. Together we're better than just me holding on to my little spot. I'm feeling bad. I'm feeling good because it's my thing. It's a we thing, and not just a we thing. We get past that selfish notion, and in that we got to just grow up and understand that as we come together, this neighbor to neighbor is powerful. When we come together like this, we can change this whole city, state, region. But you got to make room for people and find the value in them. Just like an old crumpled up, if you go outside and find a crumpled up, tore up $100 bill, you're not, and if it's got dog poop on it, you're going to pick it up because it has value. Those persons in the community, they may be battered, torn, and kind of negative with dog poop seemingly on them. They still have value. And we've got to expand that. And not be selfish.
Change behaviors that we don't cling to something because it's built. I find that all over the city.
I would say it takes a lot of time. So one of the things that I was just having this conversation with a colleague the other day, it seems like we have a missing generation, which is Gen X. And so often boomers and millennials are the ones, I'll say, fighting for, I need a chance, and you're saying, I'm going to hold on to my chance forever. And so what I know that my generation is looking for, in particular, that we don't have anymore, but we used to have, is more apprenticeship opportunities. And so I have had the great pleasure of having tons of leadership since I was a very young person. That's what Girl Scouts creates. But when people don't have that opportunity, they're craving for someone to show them the mentorship that many people don't have. And we're lacking in a strong way, significant way, mentorship. So what I would suggest is that person may not be ready to give that position, but there's an opportunity for them to let someone shadow and for them to show them the ropes, because now there's a different legacy. And so when we start to teach people about how their legacy lives, now then they can let go a little bit, because someone else is doing it, maybe not totally my way, but they have a lot of my pieces in there. And so when I can see someone else walking around manifesting what I've been developing for all these years, I feel so much better, because now it's not just about me. So I would say maybe transition to help them think about how they give other people the tools to be stronger in their leadership journey. That's great.
Just to add to that real quickly, I would say, so personal identities are really powerful, right? How we define who we are, and when elements of our personal identities feel threatened, the natural reaction is to become defensive and to hold on to them very tightly. And so if being a leader of your neighborhood association is an important part of a person's identity, if it's part of how, that's where their worth comes from, that's where their value comes from, is I've done so much good, and this is, people look up to me and people respect me, and I'm influential in this role, and that's really important to me, that's part of how I define who I am. Then I think, to your point, is there a way to not strip that away from someone or try to pull that away from someone, but rather maybe replace that piece with exactly what you just described, which is good leaders lead, great leaders develop leaders, right? And so you want to be a great leader, preparing this next generation of neighborhood leaders and helping transition and mentor those people to prepare them for that role. That's your legacy. That's the ultimate imprint that you can have here. So, I mean, I'd love to say we could say, well, we should try to help people be less sort of ego-driven, but rather I think it's better just to tap into the ego and kind of say, here's a way to expand your legacy, expand your point. Yeah.
Can you all really quickly cite an actual concrete example of some of the things that you've been telling us about, that you've lived, that you've experienced, so people really go away with, okay, this is how this worked?
So I can give one to the piece about how to set a vision. So one of the things we did in the Envision Exhale Apartments process was we wanted to develop a community vision, because ultimately what the residents told me was at some point we want to be self-sustaining, and that means MBHA gets put out of business at some point, not necessarily today, but they don't have to then be a part of our process. We can manage ourselves. And so we created vision statements, but we started with individual vision statements. So each individual person wrote their own vision statement for themselves. What are you responsible for in this community? Because this community only becomes what you want it to be when you have ownership of that. We then wrote table vision statements for the entire table. They agreed on what the language was, and then we wrote one collective one that actually will live inside the plan that everybody agreed on. I always said I was just a translator. My job was not to dictate what it was just to say I heard. I then took those individual vision statements and then we laminated them, put the string on them, and they put them in their homes or on their rearview mirrors, wherever they wanted to continue to read their vision for their community. The other tangible I say is if you want to know how to do kind of public participation or get a little deeper into it, the International Association of Public Participation, IAPP, that can probably help you with thinking through some tactics that might help with more of your engagement in your communities.
We have a good one. Okay.
I think about several things in terms of how can I sit here and Kingdom Cafe and Grill function, empower people, trust them. When they make mistakes, they will, but failure leads to success. You continue to empower people, give people opportunities. Departments that we have, sure, it's not enough, but still, those persons in the church that have a skill set of wanting to do repairs or lead in that capacity, empower them and begin to just coach them into doing that. Persons that come into the school system, they're not as knowed up, maybe their classroom manager is not as good. Educate them, continue to engage them, inspect what you expect, and continue to hold their hand until they can fly. But you can't give up on people, you gotta give people an opportunity to do that. And in terms of a vision needs to be fluid. You can't just hold on and say, this is it, because if you're taking some medicine, if you're taking some medicine that's making you well now, if you continue to take that same medicine beyond its prescribed time, it will not make you well, it will then make you sick. So we've got to continue to grow. Nashville is not the Nashville it used to be. I love to kind of, be able to walk down some of the neighborhoods I used to walk down. However, I run into that building and I try to run across the street. I've got to embrace the growth and enjoy the journey.
I mean, I started by talking about the idea of relational design, and I think the best example I've experienced, it wasn't me doing it, it was somebody doing it for me, was when my wife and I were living in the Grant Park neighborhood of Atlanta, right downtown. We lived right across the street from Grant Park, from Zoo Atlanta. We could sit on our back deck and hear the lions roaring at the zoo, which would always freak people out when they came over to visit. We'd ask them to sit on the back deck. But we were renters, in this very there's this really tight-knit community of people who lived right there on the park. And I remember the leader of the neighborhood association came by when we moved in and introduced himself. And, I sort of sheepishly was, well, we're renters, and he just said, well, welcome. And, we're so glad to have you as part of this neighborhood. And we all look out for each other here. And we all, and he was introducing me to people who lived in the neighborhood and explaining some of the things that people did to help keep each other safe. And to me, that was helping me understand who these people were that could be affected by my behavior and helping me understand what I could do and how I could contribute. And when he did those two things, we started feeling embedded and a part of this community and wanted to be more active in doing our part to sort of help. And so I just think his ability to engage and initiate relationship and show that we were valued there, even though maybe we weren't this sort of more permanent part that other people were in the neighborhood, was very powerful.
Thank you, panelists, so much for joining us. Can you mind asking after we close up here, because it's 11 o'clock and I want to get people out of here. Thank you all so much for being here with us today.